Welcome back to another episode of the Two Balls, One Basket podcast, a podcast of the Playbook Sports Network. Make sure to visit our website, playbooksn.com, and to follow us on X at PlaybookSN. As always, I am your host, Jordan, and fantasy football legend Zach Sadek is the guest today.
What's up? First time with my face on the screen.
Yeah, you've been on like the last four podcasts. It's like you're a regular at this point.
Might as well be.
All right, so the format for today is I had people send us their fantasy football rosters, and Zach and I were going to break them down. We're going to grade them. If you listen, I hope you like your grade. If you don't, blame Zach. He's the one doing it. So first up is Chris Borkowski. His team is here on the screen, and his format was a 10-team PPR, and he had the 8th overall pick. So looking here, it looks as if Davante Adams was probably his first pick. Would you guess, right?
He'd probably snag Devontae and Stephon Diggs at the end of the first, early second in either order.
So let's read the whole team, and then we'll go from there. So his QB is Justin Herbert, and then his 3 wide receivers are Stephon Diggs, Davante Adams, Calvin Ridley. Running backs, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kenneth Walker. His tight end is George Kittle, and then his flex is George Pickens. So we'll start with the starters, and then we can get to the bench after that. So Zach, what do you think of this? Because I think this starting lineup right here is pretty disgusting.
That is, you said 10 teams, right?
10 teams.
I actually love this starting lineup. This is an elite setup. I don't know how he ended up with all of those receivers, plus Herbert, and he has 2 young running backs that I really love going into the season. So I'm first glance, I'm giving this an A plus.
I'm giving this an A plus because George Pickens, to me, I love him. I wanted him in every league. I wasn't able to get him in one of my leagues, so I'm upset about it. Jahmyr Gibbs, high on my list. We talked about it last podcast. I thought he was one that's going to be a league winner. Stephon Diggs, Davante Adams, you can't go wrong. Calvin Ridley, you know what you're getting. He's in a better situation than he was in Atlanta.
Possible league winner as well.
Yeah, these are all league winners. And then you got 2 proven guys in Diggs and Davante Adams. You really cannot go wrong here.
The receivers are ridiculous. Diggs and Adams could both be top 3 or 4 wide receivers in fantasy year long. Herbert is not considered one of the top 4 or 5 quarterbacks in fantasy, but 2 years ago he was the number 2 quarterback in fantasy. So there's no doubting that he has the potential to end up being a top guy. So just from top to bottom, this starting lineup is filthy. Kittle, you know what he can do. It depends on how that offense is going to use him, but he could also be a top 5 tight end for you. If you want to get nitpicky, you can look at the bench with a couple of older guys. But even there's a lot of potential. McKinnon had a great year last year. Elijah Mitchell is there ready for whenever McCaffrey misses a game or 2 due to injury. God forbid, but that's a solid insurance policy there. And then Sky Moore could also break out this year. So it's not a bad team at all.
The bench is where it's going to get fun because it's like, how good can your bench really be in a 10-person league?
Right. Like I said, it's nitpicky. But obviously, but specifically, I'm not a big fan of Thielen. I don't know how big of a role he's going to have in Carolina, rookie quarterback. But that's all preference stuff. But the bottom line is there's some guys on the bench with potential to become starters, push come to shove.
And then, we're not even going to rate the kickers. Zach hates kickers.
I'm anti-kicker. All my leagues, I do not have kickers.
And then defense, Zach has now forced the new strategy on me to stream a defense every week. Even though I always end up getting lucky and I always pick the number 1 overall defense. It just so happens to be that way. But, New York's not bad.
You can't always be that lucky. I like going on a week-by-week basis. Obviously, on paper, the Jets have a good defense, but look who they're playing in week 1. The Buffalo Bills. So would you rather ride the Jets defense or would you rather pick up someone? I think in one of my leagues I have the Commanders defense. And if I remember correctly, they're playing the Cardinals first week.
You told me to pick them up.
And that's going to be the worst offense in the league. So no matter how bad the Commanders defense might be or how not perfect they are, they're going to destroy the Cardinals offense. So you're going to probably end up with more points than, the Jets defense in week 1. but that's a personal preference to stream defenses.
I think my only issue with the bench is it looks like he went really Chiefs heavy, and you never know the Chiefs receiver. It's like Kelsey is a lock, and then 1 week could be Valdez Scantling, 1 week could be Sky Moore, 1 week could be Rashee Rice. You never know. McKinnon, I like. McKinnon, for where he probably got him, is probably just a no-brainer at that point.
I agree with that, but at the same time, let's call that the best offense in the league, or maybe one of the top 2, 3 offenses in the league. He took a couple lottery tickets.
Yep.
And if Patrick Mahomes decides that, Rashee Rice, whatever his name is going to be my go-to guy this season, which he's had every year of his career except for last year, and he just decides that this is going to be my targeted receiver of the year, boom, this guy's winning the league. End of story. So he took a couple lottery tickets on a great offense, and I can't blame him for that.
I mean, I could speak on his behalf. He's one of my best pals. He does not like to gamble, so the fact that he gambled here, it's pretty cool. So, based off of everything, it's 10 team. Considering where he picked, I'm going to give this team an A-.
I'm assuming it was the end of the first. I don't think he could have done better than grabbing two top receivers and then 2 running backs down the line that could definitely pop. I'm giving it an A+. I have no reference because this is the first thing that we're looking at, but I'm giving it an A+. Good job, Bork.
All right. Now it's on to 2.
Very different setup.
All right. This one, friend of the network, is Heat Miser. His name's Tyler. I know a lot of people don't know that. His setup was 8-team PPR. He had the 2nd overall pick. So, again, we'll start with the starters. Jalen Hurts at QB. Then his 2 running backs are Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, all reliables. Wide receivers, Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Tight end, TJ Hawkinson. Flex, my prized possession, Jalen Waddle. And then who cares about the rest? So let's start with the starters. What do you think, Zach? It's looking like, I'm going to say this just because I know him and he's a psychotic Bengals fan. Jamar Chase, obviously the first pick.
Obviously, and I had the 2nd pick in the draft recently, and I also took Jamar Chase, so no hate on that pick whatsoever. The one thing I will say going into it is grow up from the 8-team league. If you're going to have an 8-team league, you have to have more roster spots than that, because with the roster construction like that, every team's going to be stacked. So 8 teams, no hate toward it, but you got to make it where there's actual strategy involved and not every team is stacked. Maybe 1 more receiver slot, 2 flexes, something along those lines.
Another QB.
Or another QB. That's a nice way to spice it up. I love my super flex leagues. So that's just a personal thing. As far as roster construction, hard to complain. 2 of the top, 8 running backs. Amon-Ra St. Brown could be a top 5 receiver. Obviously, Jalen Waddle has that potential as well. Hawkinson's going to be a top 5 tight end. No complaints. The only downside of that starting lineup, I'd say, probably is tight end. But not everyone can get the Kelseys or Andrews of the league, so it's not the end of the world.
I mean, we did say in the last podcast, TJ Hawkinson has tier 1 potential.
He does have tier 1 potential. Personally, because he's kind of in that same tier as Darren Waller. It's basically Kelce, then space, then Andrews, then space, and then this tier with Hawkinson and Waller, in my opinion. And I like Waller of the 2. You can even throw Kittle in there, but I do like Waller of the 2. But again, that's getting nitpicky. This is a pretty good draft. I'm assuming he smashed on all of those first 5 picks.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like he had his absolute way, because to get those skill position players and then still be able to land Jalen Hurts, like you said it on the podcast too, Jalen Hurts is going to be a fantasy monster. He was last year, and he's only going to get better.
And not even that. Look at how deep this team goes. The first 2 off the bench are Deebo Samuel and Chris Godwin. Those are starters on most fantasy teams.
Mm-hmm.
So he let the draft fall to him. He took the steals where they were, and it's deep.
Now I know you're not one to usually you're not the one to hold a backup tight end. So do you think? I mean, I know Fryermuth was pretty high on our tier list. Do you think it was smart to grab another high tier tight end in case something were to happen to Hawkinson? I mean, I know there's some injury with him now. I don't know if it's going to affect his playing week 1.
Um, I have less of a problem with that than I do with grabbing a second defense. But when it comes down to double tight ends, it's not really necessary. But I guess in an 8-team league of this format, there's probably going to be tons of available free agents if you end up with running back or receiver injuries. The free agency pool is probably much stronger than it would be in other leagues. So no, I mean it's not that big of a deal. Fryermuth, like you said, can pop. He can end up being one of those top 5 tight end types. And obviously in other league formats, he wouldn't have been there in the round that he ended up taking him. So no complaints there either. But that extra defense is definitely wasting a roster spot.
So what do we think about a backup QB of Geno Smith, Mister? They wrote me off, but I did not write back.
Very solid backup quarterback. He's probably, I don't remember if he's top, if he's like the 12th ranked quarterback, 13th ranked quarterback. But obviously, if there's any injury to Jalen Hurts or the bye week, Geno Smith is definitely a viable quarterback. Hopefully, on that bye week, he's playing a good or a poor defense, so that you can get some solid points. But Jalen Hurts is going to be your rock star all season.
Then James Cook is one, he has, I guess, high potential, you could
Yep.
say. I don't really know how much he's going to do in Buffalo.
I'm not a fan of the Buffalo running backs.
Yeah,
Every year they're going to start using the running back. The running back's going to go crazy, and it never happens.
and then it's
It's
Josh
just
Allen.
passing offense.
Yeah.
It's Josh Allen's offense. James Cook's just living in it, so he could pop. He could end up being a surprise, but I don't consider him to be in that league winner category.
All right, Zach, give it a grade. What you got?
All right. I will give it a solid A minus.
I'm giving the name an A plus. Considering it's an 8-team league, I have an 8-team league, but mine's a keeper, different format and everything. I'm gonna give it a B plus.
I am giving the name an F minus because he does not have Dak on his team. It must be changed.
Oh, I got one, but I'll tell it to him because it's kind of dirty. All right, so Zach A minus, Jordan B plus. On to the next one. Who's next? Next is Vinny. Let's go big on this one because it's just one picture. All right, so Vinny, his is 10-team PPR. He had the 8th overall pick. So we'll start QB Lamar Jackson, running backs Nick Chubb, Joe Mixon, wide receivers Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Hopkins, tight end Kyle Pitts, and then it's looking like 2 flexes. He's got Tyler Lockett, Rashad White, and then fuck the defense. So let's start with the starters. I understand the value of DeAndre Hopkins. I'm not high on him just because he's in Tennessee. If he were literally, if he was in like Arizona, I'd still be higher on him. I just don't like Ryan Tannehill. I'm anti-Tannehill. I'm a Dolphin fan.
But the thing is, you don't even know who's going to be quarterback for him. It could be Tannehill for a week, and then it could end up being Malik Willis. It could end up being Will Levis.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know who's going to be throwing it to him, and if it is Tannehill, he has a higher ceiling than if it wasn't Tannehill, but you just don't know. So I'm definitely with you as far as a starting number 2 receiver. That's definitely shaky to me.
Actually, I'm going to take it back because, Tannehill housed a top 10 fantasy wide receiver in A.J. Brown. He could do it with Hopkins.
He's also on the back end of his career. Talking about Tannehill last year, didn't really do much. I think he ended up getting benched at one point. So Tannehill, he's not a gunslinger. He's not going to feed DeAndre Hopkins, but he's a better option than Will Levis or Willis.
So looking at this team, I'm going to assume Stephon Diggs was his first overall pick. What do you think about that? Because if it's going like most things I've seen, that means he probably passed on Devontae Adams. That means he probably passed on Saquon. I like Stephon Diggs. I think he's still going to be a top 5 fantasy receiver. So I don't get why a lot of people let him fall. So I don't have an issue taking him this high.
I'm with you. He probably. I would also assume that he passed on Devontae Adams, Saquon, Tony Pollard. But for me, I like Devontae Adams a little bit more than Stephon Diggs. Obviously, Adams has the new quarterback, but we've seen Jimmy G support top wide receivers in fantasy. So, but that's a preference thing. I actually see Adams and Diggs very similarly.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not gonna knock off points for him taking one over the other. But it's a preference thing.
And then I don't think we need to grade Nick Chubb because I told you last episode, you know what you're going to get from him. You're going to get 12, 1,300 yards. You're going to get 9, 10 touchdowns. You're going to get a top 10 fantasy running back. Joe Mixon's one that's interesting because he's usually pretty high in fantasy rankings, but this year he's actually got the backfield to himself. He is at that age where running backs start to fall off, though. So what do you think about Joe Mixon?
That one is definitely a little bit underwhelming for me. And when I'm looking through this roster, that's the question mark. If you went Stephon Diggs, then Nick Chubb in round 3, I'm assuming that means he went Mixon, maybe Lamar. It would have been high for Lamar, but as a round 3 running back, I'm not the biggest fan of Joe Mixon. Obviously, he is a very talented running back, a little bit older, but he's in a heavy passing offense, similar to the Bills, but not to that extent, obviously. It's Joe Burrow's offense. There's plenty of mouths to feed. It's hard to see Mixon entering that top 10, top 12-ish territory. And depending on who's on the board, it might have been the best running back available, but at that point, I probably would have waited and picked up some younger guys with higher ceilings a round or two later.
I mean, I'm high on Mixon, so I have no issue with the pick. I like him. I had him on my team last year. I debated on keeping him. I had to let him go because I'd rather jump off a cliff than let Waddle walk. But Lamar Jackson, you're getting probably one of a top 5 running back, and you're getting a top 10 quarterback. The things that he can do are just unbelievable. So we already know what we're getting there. Here's an interesting one. Kyle Pitts. It's looking as if he waited. He drafted a tight end late. I think if he did wait late, say maybe 6th, 7th round, the value for Kyle Pitts is just unbeatable.
Yeah, I agree. It depends on how far down he took him. I'm not a Kyle Pitts truther. I'm not a guy that's like, you got to draft him, secure him early because he has all this potential and he's going to be the focal point of the offense, because it's been 2 years and we haven't seen any of that. So, it depends who else was there. Hopefully it wasn't a kind of panic draft where, Kittle's gone, Waller's gone, and then Pitts is just that last guy that's like possibly a big name. So you grab him in, round 5 or 6. Because in one of my drafts this year, I ended up punting on tight end, end up picking up a guy later, someone like Cole Kmet, someone like Tyler Higbee, that we know has a big part of their offense. That would probably give you somewhere close to what Kyle Pitts can. So I'm not a huge fan of Kyle Pitts, but obviously every draft has its own give and take, and maybe he got him for a great value. Maybe he got him in the 8th round, and who knows?
I know exactly why he picked Kyle Pitts. He went to Florida. He's a big Florida fan. That's exactly why I picked him.
And if that's the case, I disagree, because I'm a big proponent of drafting with your head and not with your heart. I have drafted several Dolphins players in my past. Not several. At first, I would draft Dolphins players become hugely disappointed, lose all the leagues. And it wasn't until I started drafting with my head that I started having some success.
But it looks like he drafted Tyler Lockett since you refused to for some odd reason. Tyler Lockett, old reliable. You know you're gonna get top 17 receiver.
A
I think
decent floor.
yeah, I think he's perfect for a flex position. And Rashad White is somebody that a lot of fantasy podcasts, fantasy programs are all anticipating a breakout. What do you think about that? I know he was fairly high on our rankings.
He was middle of the pack.
Yeah.
He's a guy that has no real, big name competition to take away touches from him in that offense. But it's Baker Mayfield. We don't know how good that offense is going to be, and if it's a bad offense, there will be rushing opportunities, but it won't be as much as a team like the Browns that they'll run the ball to start the game, and then they'll run the ball at the end of the game. When they're winning. So it's a tricky thing to project. Rashad White could be solid, could be disappointing. In a perfect world, he'd be my first running back off the bench, and you can plug him into a flex or to a running back spot depending on the matchup and depending on what he's done all season long. But I'm a little bit iffy on having to rely on him as a starter.
And then the bench is looking pretty good for being a 10-team league. Kirk Cousins, backup quarterback, literally no complaints. Don't even care what anybody thinks of Kirk Cousins. If he's your backup QB in fantasy, you're doing something right. Rashad Penny, Khalil Herbert, Mike Evans, Gabe Davis, Darnell Mooney. I hate Gabe Davis. He screwed me last year. But Rashad Penny, I don't think you could go wrong really with any of the Eagles running backs. Like that offense is just built for runners, even though Jalen Hurts is there. And then Khalil Herbert, that one I may have personally stayed away from just because of the way Justin Fields runs. Like Fields and Hurts both run, but Fields does it a lot more. And then I think the two receivers, I like this bench for a 10-team league. If I left my draft with this bench, I'm confident.
I do like Kirk Cousins as a QB2, a nice insurance policy there. Got the two purple quarterbacks. I do like Rashad Penny personally. It sounds like he hasn't had the best offseason or training camp, but I like the talent. He won't be forced to take too much of a workload. In the Eagles offense, obviously when he was in Seattle, he couldn't get the season healthy, but with a lower workload, potentially he can be used in a very efficient and favorable way. So I think that he should have a good season. I have him on I think on two of my teams. So I am, putting my money where my mouth is with that one. Khalil Herbert, I like the upside. He should be running back one in that offense. The offense that still fed David Montgomery last year had a decent fantasy year. So if Herbert's going to be the number one, he can put up solid numbers. The only question is he the unquestioned number one? Because I think they drafted a running back. They brought in Deontay Foreman. So it could be a mixed bag of, kind of a committee there. But if it's Herbert's job, he's possibly a plug and play starting running back at times this year. Not a fan of Gabe Davis or Darnell Mooney. Their offenses don't really support them the way that they should. Mooney is like third wide receiver now, fourth if you count Komet in Chicago. But I do love Mike Evans. What's his face? Baker Mayfield is going to have to throw the ball somewhere, and they have two huge targets there with Godwin and Evans. I like having Mike Evans down there stashed just in case you need another receiver there.
So, time for grades. Based off of a 10-team league, 8th pick, I'm going to give this team an A-. I like this team. This is one that if I drafted, I'm confident. Yeah, I'm going A- confidently.
I am going B-.
B-.
It is a solid team, has the potential to win the league, but there does seem to be a few weak points and a couple things that would need to break right for this team to really take that step to being elite altogether. So I'm going B-.
Okay. On to the next one.
Haven't seen any horrible teams, so
I haven't,
that's
which is,
promising.
yeah, very surprising. All right. Next is Tyler McFarland, who is also a fan of the network. This one's interesting. 10 team, half PPR, ninth pick. So we'll start with the starters. His QB Justin Fields, I think was just perfect for half PPR. Wide receivers are Calvin Ridley, DJ Moore, so it looks like he went with a stack. Running backs, Nick Chubb, Travis Etienne. Tight end, Travis Kelce. Wide receiver, George Pickens, my guy. So we'll start with the starters. What are we thinking? Half PPR. I haven't played in half PPR in I don't know how long.
Yeah, that was when it was first transitioning from standard to PPR fully. Everyone was taking baby steps. But you said this was the ninth pick.
Ninth overall pick.
So obviously he took Kelsey, and at the ninth pick, I have no complaints about that. Kelsey gives you the fantasy value of a top 5 pick at a position where nobody else is getting even close to that. So I have no complaints with the Kelsey pick. My complaint lies where he comes back around at pick 11, and it looks like he forced running back. He could be just a Nick Chubb fan. But in this class of wide receivers, pick 11 is where the Devontae Adams, the Stephon Diggses are going. So possibly those guys were taken. But with the top wide receivers in this class just being like head and shoulders above the next group, I probably would have recommended going wide receiver with that second pick. You secure the tight end to get you a wide receiver, and then you fill in the running backs after the fact. But he went with a different build. He went tight end, and then getting his anchor running back up top, and then he filled in the receivers with the kind of the next tier or two level guys.
I think for a half PPR, you can't get any better than Nick Chubb. Like, come on.
You know what? Now that you reminded me that it's half PPR, you're right. Nick Chubb is probably a top 5 pick in half point PPR. Thank you for reminding me of that.
I think the only hole here in the starters, just considering that it's a half PPR, would probably be DJ Moore. But DJ Moore's a gamble. What is Jordan Love doing? Jordan loves gambling. So Jordan would have picked DJ Moore right as well.
Yeah. Yeah, Ridley, I personally love Ridley, and I've been unfortunate enough to end up whiffing on him in all of my leagues so far. I've gone into every draft trying to snag him at the right value, but he always gets picked ahead of me. I think that he's going to have a great season with Trevor Lawrence. So the only problem is he hasn't played football in a year and a half. So at wide receiver 2 is kind of where on my team I'd like to have him. Obviously, this team is relying on him heavy as the top wide receiver.
So let's get to the bench because it looks like we're running low on time. Jahan Dotson, Jerry Jeudy, Alvin Kamara, Aaron Rodgers, Rashad Penny, Zay Flowers. We've already covered Rashad Penny. Alvin Kamara. Considering where he probably got him because of the 3-game suspension, absolute steal. I think Rodgers is a nice backup QB. New offense. You never know how it's going to go. Zay Flowers, probably my favorite rookie. I'm making sure I get him in every single league.
Yep. Alvin Kamara, I'm getting him anywhere that I can. You just got to wait 3 weeks, take the L 3 weeks, fill in your running back spot with a couple other backs for a couple weeks, and you have a possible league winner. You have Derek Carr coming in, new quarterback, but that offense just runs through Kamara. He catches, he runs, he does a little bit of everything. I guess that kind of gets negated a little bit in a half PPR, his receiving upside, but it still helps. And combined rushing and receiving, he's over 1,000 yards every single season.
All right, Zach. I'm giving this team a B+. Just because it's a half PPR and those are hard. I'm not exactly Sure how every other team looks, but I think he set himself up pretty nicely. Kelsey, Lock, Chubb, Fields, very good for half PPR. So I'm gonna give it a B plus.
That feels right. That feels right. I like B plus. Yeah, that's fair. I like B plus.
Okay. Let's hope you win this league because half PPR, never doing that again. Now, next, our friend from the Five Reasons Sports Network, Sean Rochester.
On
Sean
Rochester.
Rochester, 12 team PPR. He had the 12th overall pick. Right off
Oh,
the bat, God, this is going to be a hard one. Right off the bat, we already know he took Stephon Diggs first.
yep.
So we'll read the starters. Justin Herbert,
Oh,
Stephon
Bijan.
Diggs, Keenan Allen, Bijan Robinson. Oh, he has Bijan. Laporta, stupid name. James Cook, CJ Watson, Christian Watson, whatever his name is. What we thinking, Zach? It's looking
He
like
definitely,
first two picks, Bijan, Stephon.
definitely went Bijan and Stephon. I'm not a huge fan of Bijan, but like we mentioned in the last pod, at the back end of the first or early second, obviously this is a bigger league, 12 teams. I definitely like the value better for Bijan there, so no complaints with that pick. If they feed him like they should be feeding the eighth overall pick, that should pay off dividends for him. So I love the top two picks. Gets himself a top five quarterback. Um, he's going to be relying on Keenan Allen. He got that stack, which is nice, the Herbert and Keenan Allen stack. But then obviously with 12 teams, as you get down the lineup, it kind of gets a little bit more sparse, I guess we can say. Um, but it looks like he punted on tight end. Probably was one of the last two or three guys to take a tight end because Laporta is there late in drafts. Not a very popular name amongst tight ends. James Cook as a starter, Christian Watson as a starter. Not ideal, but again, when you're in 12 teams, you're taking guys that have the potential to pop, and both of those guys do.
I really like this bench. Rashad White, Jahan Dotson, Khalil Herbert, who we just covered. Dotson we covered. Rashad White we covered. Cortland Sutton, I mean, you have to assume Russell Wilson's going to have a better year than he did last year. Jerry Judy's hurt, so Cortland Sutton's just looking like a target monster. And then Anthony Richardson, who's just like one of the most interesting rookie quarterbacks we've seen in a while because he has the potential to just become the fantasy quarterback.
Yep. Yep. He has James Cook and Rashad White. Whichever of those running backs pops, throw them in the starting lineup. Even Khalil Herbert, same situation.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of young running backs with potential there. I love Cortland Sutton. I'm grabbing him everywhere I can. He's way down the ranks from where what happened last year with that putrid offense. But without Jerry Judy, he's the number one guy. And I
And they
don't care
just cut
what you
Albert O.
yeah, and I don't care what you think about Russell Wilson. He's good enough to feed a receiver, and they're probably not going to run Javante into a wall early on in the season, coming off of his injury. So they're probably going to be looking towards Sutton often. So I love that pick, especially that deep in the bench. I mean, he must have gotten him late, and then possibly the best insurance quarterback on the market, Anthony Richardson. Even with Josh Herbert, depending on the league settings, right? Obviously, Richardson is more mobile. Will be getting more rushing yards, rushing touchdowns. By halfway through this season, Richardson could be just as valuable as Herbert to either use to switch them in and out on a matchup basis, or use Anthony Richardson as trade fodder to get someone toward the end of the year to really stack that offense or that starting lineup.
All right, Zach, grade it. Considering 12-team league with Sutton, with Richardson, Herbert, Diggs, Bijan, I'm going to have to, I know I've been given a lot of A minuses. I'm going to give it an A minus just because I personally have done a 12-man league. I know how freaking hard they are. And mine did not look that good. Mine looked really bad. Like I was starting Jalen Warren in my 12-man league.
Yep. We're kind of melding minds here, must be through osmosis, but I'm also thinking A minus because, like you said, in 12-team leagues, it's very easy to let it get away from you, and you just start taking stabs on guys. But this is a fairly complete roster. The starting lineup isn't perfect, but there's a lot of guys toward the bottom of the lineup and the top of the bench that could just easily be rearranged to become startable players. I'm probably starting Cortland Sutton until Christian Watson proves something. Um, Out of those three young running backs, you pick whichever one has the best matchup or the one that's looking better throughout the season. Really, no weak points other than tight end. And hell, even Sam Laporta could get fed. You don't draft tight ends. I think they took him in the second round. You don't draft tight ends that early with no intentions of using them.
There's probably
He,
a lot of rookie tight ends still available that have potential to pop off whenever.
Right, but he's filling that role that Hawkinson left, and especially early on before Jameson Williams gets back from his suspension, it's going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Sam Laporta as the main pass catcher.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see. I might look to pick up another tight end if there is one available in free agency. Probably not, considering 12 teams picked at least one tight end. But that's the only kind of shaky thing that I'm not comfortable with if this was my team.
Okay. So A minus is around. All right,
A
Zach,
minus.
we have 1 minute left. I'm going to read you one. This is from Ahi Black. He sent it last minute. I'm going to do it because I like the guy. I'm just going to read it. So listen carefully. We're just going to grade it because I think 10-man league, it looks like he had the first pick. QB Lamar Jackson. Running backs are Miles Sanders, Alexander Mattinson. Wide receivers, Justin Jefferson, Jalen Waddle. Tight end, Mark Andrews. Flex, Amari Cooper. Bench, Herbert, Sky Moore, Michael Thomas, Anthony Richardson,
Herbert.
Khalil Herbert.
Okay.
Tyler Higbee, Devon Achane, and Rashad Bateman.
You said 10 teams?
I said 10 teams.
I do not like the running backs. He obviously went wide receiver heavy early.
Going B minus.
Just based off of my memory recall of everyone that you just listed through, probably a B minus or a C plus, to be honest. With the number one pick, you could probably do better with those back-to-back picks every other round. So B minus or C plus because of the running backs.
And that concludes today. Wow, we are really down to the last seconds here. Zach, anything you want to say before I let you go?
That is it. Check us out on X, no longer Twitter. Hit us up with fantasy questions. We're here all year.
Zach, appreciate you as always. Let's go.